got assistants up here. Brent is supposed to keep me out of trouble. So if he was doing his job, I wouldn't be standing up here right now. You know, we've had a conversation about that. Fate. Fate is just great. I mean, so you end up with an opener because Amy Wortham met Hope. Hope is my neighbor. She lives right below me, Amy. Amy is my assistant, the person who keeps me straight. All right. So I imagine that you're going to have a really good conversation. I don't think Hope knows too many secrets, but Amy knows quite a bit. So. All right. But I'm glad to be here this morning and to just share with you for a few minutes. I mean, this is a wonderful audience. I've had a good time just walking around, getting to know people, and meeting people. What do they say? Confession is good for the soul, right? So let's confession time. And I can say this because my mother is not here, right? My mom is a wonderful person. Since this is going to be filmed, she's going to be wanting to see it, so I can't say too many things about Mom. But when Mike and Rachel approached me about doing this last year, I said, yeah, I'll be willing to do it. We sat down, we've had a number of conversations about that. Mike gave me the list, for the next year of things to talk about, right? The topics of discussion. And so I looked at the list. I mistakenly showed the list to my mother. I should have not done that, all right? So looking at it, and I'm thinking, first of all, I'm not going to do February because February is Black History Month, and I'm usually very, very busy in that month. But we looked at it. So next month, I think, is courage, right? Next month is courage. And I was thinking, I'll do courage. And my mom said, no, that's too easy. You do that all the time. As a historian, you're looking at people who practice courage all the time. She said, why don't you do curiosity? So I listened to Mom, and I said, okay, I'll do curiosity. So I have been sweating bullets for a few months. Amy knows, and other people know. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this subject? Curiosity. So here we are. So if this is a disaster, we'll blame Mom, right? All right? This is Mom's. So Rachel asked me for a blurb about this talk. You may have seen the blurb. I thought about this for a little while. I'll say this. The car is my sanctuary. I love to get in the car and just drive. It's generally when I'm in a car that I can think, and I can think freely. It can be a little dangerous. Don't get around me when I'm in the car and on the road, because I also find ways to try to write my thoughts down, This is what scholars do. I found out that this is what many writers do. So, it may not be a safe place to be on the road with us. But I thought about the blurb, and I came up with this, which said, curiosity, our being curious, is central to our humanity. But in what direction does our curiosity lead us? Because when I think about curiosity, I think about forward thinking, okay? It's exploration. That's what I think about. But I'm a historian, so I have to think about the past. That's what I do. So I went on to say that while a curious spirit often pushes us or propels us forward, is there something to be gained from a curiousness that prompts us to look back? Is it worth looking back? Looking at history, studying history. So this is my idea. As I was driving, I thought about this talk. I couldn't help but think about the Mars rover Curiosity. I love music. One of my favorite pieces of music is Boyz II Men's I Will Get There, right? From the Prince of Egypt. And if you've not heard the instrumental part, it's fantastic. And it just gets me thinking. And, I was thinking about the Mars rover Curiosity. I thought about what it would be like to be the rover itself, traveling from Earth to Mars. What would I see? What would we see? Listening to that music, it stimulated a lot of thought about what we would see. The universe, seeing things that would be new to us, but I also thought about the fact it's always been there. It has a history. The Mars rover on Mars right now, Curiosity, is essentially studying that planet. It's studying that planet's history. It's sending us information back. It's new to us, but its history, it's always been there. I thought about that. So this prompted me to figure out where did they get the name for the Mars rover. And if you haven't looked that up, they did a contest back in 2013 think 2010, 9,000 people entered this contest to name the Mars rover. And it was one little girl up in Connecticut who won that contest out of 9,000 submissions. And she came up with the title with the name Curiosity. And here's what she said in her essay. I thought it was really, really interesting, and I think it captures this well. She said, "Curiosity is an everlasting flame that burns in everyone's mind. It makes us get out of bed in the morning and wonder what surprises life will throw at me today. Curiosity is such a powerful force. Without it, we wouldn't be who we are today. Curiosity is the passion that drives us through our everyday lives. We have become explorers and scientists with our need to ask questions and to wonder." Clara Ma. Brilliant. Brilliant. I think she was only 12 years old when she wrote this essay. This is a brilliant, brilliant young lady. And it captures it really well. I also thought about, in thinking about this talk, Curious George. Yeah. How many of you have thought about Curious George? Remember Curious George? When I was a kid, it was my favorite book. I loved to read about Curious George and the man with the big yellow hat. You know, I'm not sure how politically correct that is today, but Curious George, nonetheless. Curious George would get in some trouble too, right? I was somewhat like Curious George. I thought about curiosity. Yes, it prompts us to ask questions. It prompts us to explore. Sometimes it can get you in a little trouble. 2 stories. My father, wonderful, wonderful man, entrepreneur. And one of the things that's unique about my experience here in Asheville, I left Asheville in 1985, but I was born and raised here. I'm a rare commodity in this city that I find out from time to time. So my parents are still here. They were happy when I came back, and the university brought me back here. But my father was an entrepreneur, and Jennifer Pickering is in here. So Jennifer will know the place that I'm talking about in Biltmore Village. Well, my dad did business with the Biltmore estate, and their offices used to be in Biltmore Village. If you go to the hotel that's right behind the Bohemian Hotel, the building is right there. Well, I have a very intimate knowledge of that building, because I drove my father's car into the building because I was being curious, all right? Dad had one of these old cars where, it didn't have the gear shift to put it into gear. It had these buttons that you pushed. And boy, I was just so curious about those buttons, and he got out one day to go in there I think he was signing contracts, he was doing something, and he left the car running. And I'm quite sure he probably said, "Don't touch anything." But I was thinking, I pushed the button, and the next thing they know, they said the whole building is just shaking outside because boom, the car goes right into the building. So I discovered that curiosity can be painful, because at the end of the day, I ended up a little bit sore, and I'm sure you know where. Second time curiosity got me in trouble was with my mother. I hadn't learned to swim, but my older brother had. We were on vacation. They were in the pool with my uncles and my dad. She had dressed me to go. We were going to dinner. I was dressed, and she said, "Well, I'll let you go outside, but do not get around the pool." Well, much like Curious George, I had to test this out, right? So I did. Got close enough to the pool that I ended up falling in and had to go back into the room, and my uncle never lets me forget this, that I showed up in the room with my mom, and she opened the door, and then my response was, "I got wet." So curiosity can get us in trouble. Curious George. You've all probably heard the statement too, curiosity killed the cat. You've heard that one, So what is it about this thing, curiosity? Because we could see it as being something that could get us in trouble, that could be dangerous. So I've told these 2 stories about my dad's experience with my father's car, falling into a swimming pool. This is the historian in me thinking about curiosity and history and how it has kind of impacted my life. I went further in my thinking about this, and I thought about the Republic of Plato. I don't know how many of you have read the Republic of Plato, interesting book, but in the opening pages of the Republic of Plato, Plato has Socrates on a journey, and he comes upon elders in a village, and he tells these elders, "I would like to have a conversation about the road that you have traveled. Because if I do that, I might learn something about the road ahead because you have traveled it already, and there may be something that I gain. I feel that this is what we do as historians. So I thought about who were those people in my life who helped to kind of shape my curiosity. And there were three people, and I want to talk about them just briefly here. And I look at them this way. I put them in the category, one of these people inspired the curiosity just by the way he lived his life. The other person encouraged it and really is responsible for me being where I am today. And the other person guided it. So three components here: inspire, encourage, and guiding our curiosity. The first person, if we go to the next slide, I think I had a quote up there, is Isaiah Rice. And some of you may have heard about Isaiah Rice. We have done a lot of work on Isaiah Rice. Isaiah Rice was my grandfather, died in 1980. He has been dead for almost 40 years, but he's back in a big way because my mother, as many of you know, his own curiosity led him to continuously take these pictures. And the last count of the number of photographs that he took over the course of his lifetime was about 1,600 photographs that they have finally digitized the whole set at the university. There's an exhibit of some of the photographs just right next door at BPR, at WCQS's radio station, if you're curious to go see some. And what's interesting about his photography is that it tells us a story about an Asheville that we don't see today. I was prompted to come back to study Asheville for my own doctoral dissertation simply because I got tired of people telling me that there were no African Americans in Asheville or Western North Carolina. I knew that my own family's history went back to 1850, so I said, okay, I've got to put this issue to rest. And this was a serious thing people were saying, scholars. Remember, when I first ended up in Raleigh, I lived in Raleigh most of my adult life for about 23 years. And my first boss there asked me where I was from, and I said, I'm originally from Asheville, and she said, there are no black people in the mountains. So I would get this over and over again, and I'm thinking, okay, I am, so I exist, therefore I am. So let's study Asheville. I came back. And I am just very, very thrilled about the fact that I have been able to be involved in a project that has resurrected my grandfather and his work, because it shows us a story about an Asheville that once existed that I believe that through a group like this will exist again. He inspired. He and my grandmother. I have a photograph of he and my grandmother here. If you go to the next slide, you'll see Ike and Geraldine Rice. This is a couple who lived here. What inspired me so much with them is that they were world travelers. They traveled, they were frugal. He was a delivery man. She owned her own beauty salon here in Asheville, but they were so frugal with their money that they were able to travel and do all of these things. And they just absolutely captured me over the course of my life and inspired curiosity to make me see that there was a broader world beyond Asheville to experience and to explore. So I point and I thank Ike and Geraldine Rice for inspiring the curiosity. We'll go to the next slide, and I have a quote here. And this quote is from Robert Kennedy, and I think it captures the next individual very well. Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? The next individual is Mr. James A. Parker, or J. Parker. Passed away 2.5 years ago, had a major influence in my life in Washington, D.C. You have to go look up this guy. There's an article out there from 1979 he was brilliant at. He was a public relations guy. He knew how to spark people's curiosity in him. One of the ways that he did that was he was this guy walking around Washington, D.C., going from meeting to meeting, wearing Brooks Brothers suits, but he drove this Volkswagen Bug. And everybody said, who is this guy in Washington, D.C. with these Brooks Brothers suits, but he drives this Volkswagen Bug that was just as old as it could be? So there's a story that showed up in the Washington Post in 1979 about the well-traveled bug. I mean, he's brilliant at public relations and actually advertising and doing these things. This story ended up being picked up by 7 other countries around the world. It's funny because the story is I met the writer from the Washington Post with Mr. Parker one time who did the story on the car, and he said, and you know what? The car was totaled the very next week. But James A. Parker was a man who, I believe, put his money where his mouth was, and I would just like for a quick second here, I had the opportunity to go and I had to speak at his memorial service. And a very moving time just a few years ago, and these were a couple of things that I said about Mr. Parker that I gained from him. I said I concluded that I would just briefly highlight his traits, the traits that attracted to me to James Parker. And they were this: his knowledge and depth of knowledge, understanding that the elders can tell us something that we might not know. And I'm always telling my kids that. Amy introduced me, and I always, whenever I'm introduced, I look around the room and I go, where are my sons? They need to hear this. Yeah, okay. You know, maybe they'll take me serious. I'll be more than just an ATM to them, you know. But they're never around when I need them to be around. Dad does know something. You know, I've got a son now, Lewis. I have a picture of them in a few minutes you'll see. He's a computer engineer. He's majoring in computer engineering, so he thinks Dad knows nothing. But I always tell him, Dad does know something. So knowledge. Mr. Parker gave me knowledge. I jokingly said that I gained more knowledge from him, I believe, in 4 years in the undergraduate program. And I said, the state of Virginia should have just given him the right to actually give diplomas. It would have saved me a lot of time. He was patient as well. And with someone who has a very active, curious spirit, sometimes you need someone like that who will be patient, who's patient, to be able to, you know, to help encourage it, to fuel it, but also somewhat tame it, I think, in a little bit. So there's a high degree of patience that you need. And these are 2 of the biggest traits. And he had a wonderful sense of humor. This was, you know, our relationship was in full bloom in the 1990s when Seinfeld was the big show on TV, and I always knew that every Thursday night Mr. Parker was going to call after a Seinfeld episode. And generally what we would say is, in my mind, I'm already there. And Kramer said that at one point in the show. So there's James A. Parker, the person who I believe encouraged it. He encouraged me to step out of something and do something different. Because for 5.5 years, I worked as a probation parole officer in the city of Raleigh, chaired the city's housing authority for 1.5 years. And I just began to say, I want to do something different. And he encouraged me to take another step, to pursue what he really was able to see was my real interest, my curiosity and my fascination with history. He encouraged it. So the next person I want to quote here, just a quick quote that I think that describes this person, if I can find my stuff here. Things are kind of getting a little out of whack. Is this, the next person is, I quote, is Thomas Jefferson. And I think this captures the next person very well. He who knows best knows how little he knows. That should spark curiosity. So the next individual that was prominent in my life is Dr. John Hope Franklin. And if you do not know Dr. Franklin, I encourage you to go and find out about Dr. Franklin. I have a copy of his autobiography here, Mirror to America. Major historian. If we look at African American history today, the study of African American history, he is the man, the creator of this field of history was Carter G. Woodson, but the person who has taken it to a whole nother level, who took it to a whole nother level during his lifetime, was John Hope Franklin. And John Hope Franklin, this famous guy, as he was, chaired the Race Commission for Bill Clinton, the holder of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, also the winner of the John Kluge Prize. If you don't know, the John Kluge Prize is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize, because Nobel didn't set up a prize for the field of the humanities. So John Kluge did, through the Library of Congress. It was $1 million, it's $1 million award. I would love to win it, Brent. Maybe I could get this thing, right? Wonderful thing about Dr. Franklin is he won the John Kluge. He passed away a few years ago, about 10 years ago. But he won the John Kluge and then gave the bulk of that money to Fisk University, which was his alma mater, to continue to support the education of people the efforts of people to be educated. But Dr. Franklin helped to guide my curiosity all the way through the PhD process. It was Dr. Franklin who was there. He didn't have to do it. This man showed up at my dissertation proposal defense at 92 and sat there and watched me defend this. This is not something that he had to do. I learned from him that no matter who you are, how great you become through your own work, that you always can reach down to pull other people up. So when I look at Dr. Franklin, what comes to mind is someone who helped to guide the curiosity, and I owe him a great deal of gratitude for the fact that I now am able to really pursue what it is through my own curiosity that I love, and that's history. So the elders can tell us something. I would like to go to the next thing here. I talked about these people. Just talk briefly about engaging the past. I've talked about historical figures. These men, I think, have become historical figures in their own right. Isaiah Rice, it was interesting to be at a conference not too long ago where I was presenting a paper on my own work, and someone else was there presenting a paper on Isaiah Rice, who I did not know. I presented my work, he presented his work. It was question and answer time, and no one wanted to know anything about what I had done. They just wanted to know about Isaiah Rice. So I said, that's as it should be, right? Because I stand on his shoulders. So I feel that they are historical figures. So we're in this age right now, I think, of what I call, I'm using David Blight, who's a major historian who we had the opportunity to interview on the radio show that we host. And David said, we're in this period of, right now, he called monument mania. You're hearing all of the conversations about monuments. It's not just a Southern thing. Rachel and Mike and I talked about this as we were planning for this talk. Yeah, Mayor Bill de Blasio, not too long ago, set up a commission in New York to study the monuments in New York. One of the monuments that was studied was Christopher Columbus. And we look at people like Christopher Columbus today and we think, oh, well, man, it unleashed so much pain and agony. But there's also a flip side of that he was spurred ahead by his curiosity to explore the world. And the result is us here today. I think what's interesting about this period is we study the past and we engage the past, and I hope as a historian that what I do for my students and as I talk to people is that historians and history should help us to empathize with each other, to understand the human experience. We don't always get it right, but it's easy to focus on the things that we get wrong and miss the things that may be positive developments out of that. One of my favorite writers is Stanley Crouch. Stanley Crouch in 1994 wrote an essay that I really wish I had written entitled Melting the Iron Suits of History. It's a great piece. And he talks about the bloodletting that is on the pages of history when we look at history over the course of history. It's a lot of bloodletting. But he tries to point us to the ideas of the Enlightenment, and he says that at least the Enlightenment itself and those ideas that we have in our own Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, put us in a space where we at least begin to question whether or not the bloodletting and the violence of history was actually right. So there's a different way that we can look at it. We can choose to focus on the bad, which I think we need to deal with, but we can also consider the other side of it. Life is full of dichotomies. I tell my students this all the time. It just is. There's an upside, there's a downside. But I like to try to accentuate the positive, and I think I'm in good company. I'm just finishing reading the Autobiography of Nelson Mandela, and if you read this, I encourage you to read it, because I'm trying to figure out, I marvel at how a man for 27 years could be in prison, but if you look at the cover of that book, it has the biggest smile, the most beautiful smile, and who understood that there was something beyond that experience that he tried to work to bring his nation to. There's something that we can learn from the past. It can help, I believe, to guide our curiosity. I have up here a last question that I wanted to bring up, and it is here on the slide. How do we remain creatively curious? Tim, if you would go to the next slide. My suggestion is to get 2 of these. These are my 2 wonderful sons, and as you can see, they are full of dramatics, right? They keep me very curious. And as you can see, this is a photo shoot that the oldest one wanted us to do, and the photographer said, I think it would be great, because Jonathan is the actor in the family. He said, I think it would be great to put them on stage, because, that's essentially what their lives are like, me sitting back watching their lives on stage, and just let them perform. And it keeps me very curious. It keeps me wondering, what are they doing? How are they doing it? Also keeps me wondering, when will they get off my payroll? All right. But if you don't have 2 of these, we have each other. And I think that we can keep each other engaged and curious. As you work to build a new community here in Asheville, a creative community in Asheville, I encourage you to get to know Asheville's history. Get to know the history of the people that you don't always see, the marginalized. That's not only African Americans who live in this city who feel somewhat marginalized by their experience here, and we're trying to change that dynamic through the work that we're doing, but it's also people who are native white Appalachians who feel quite marginalized as well. Get to know their history. Pick up a book, read a book. I have to tell my students all the time, for heaven's sakes, read a book. Go to the library. So in concluding this, and I hope I'm doing good on time, Tim. I hope I'm making sense here. We don't have to blame Mom yet. So if I would conclude this, I would point to this, that what Einstein, I have a quote up here by Einstein in just a few minutes. We have it up now, but I would also point to 3 things. I talked about a person who inspired my curiosity, one who encouraged it, and another who guided it. I would say that what we learn from engaging the past and engaging those elders, those who can tell us something, we don't know everything. They can give us knowledge, they can give us wisdom, and they can give us perspective. And I think those 3 things helps to guide our curiosity in a way that is very creative. So when you think about yourself, the one thing that I remembered, I put this quote in here by Einstein, which said, I'm neither clever nor especially gifted. I'm only very, very curious. I hear myself introduced in some of the things that I have been able to accomplish up to this point in my life, and I'm definitely not clever. I'm definitely not gifted. But I am very, very curious. One of the first things I heard when I entered the PhD program at Chapel Hill from the chair of the history department was that it is not the most brilliant who get through this process. In fact, he said most of them fall by the wayside. It is the most persistent. And I think it is the curiosity that we have that fuels the persistence to stick in there. So while things may not look the way we want them to look today, we keep working at it, we'll get there. Thank you.